Hello and welcome to another Total War Warhammer guide. Today we are looking at the fun subject that is friendly fire. Now, having looked across the internet and played the game lots myself, it's one of the most confusing aspects of the game. People aren't quite sure how much damage it does, how it affects their units, etc, etc. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about various subjects on the topic, cover it from top to bottom. So at first we're going to talk about firing arcs and the different firing arcs that the different weapons have. Then also we're going to talk about how difficulty levels changes friendly fire. That's quite an important point. Then we're going to talk about example army formation and how to minimise friendly fire. Also target selection, unit positioning. Then we're going to do a special little bit on artillery because it works a little bit differently. And then anything else I can think of, final sort of tips and tricks that I can think of to help you guys out. So here we are, we've got our little target dummy set up. So the firing arc is basically the trajectory a missile takes after leaving the weapon. So they vary massively, and this is probably the single most important thing to understand when talking about friendly fire, because it affects everything from positioning to setting up your army. So let's have a look at the different weapons. So we've got our little Empire hand gunner here. He's going to fill in for us. Ignore the handgun, we're going to go through all the weapons, and that is handguns, bows, crossbows, cannons and catapults. Obviously there is sort of specialist weapons and stuff like these, but these are the basic sort of five. So what I'm going to do now is show you a very non-scientific line drawing that I made, pretty rainbow, of the different firing arcs. As we can see, we'll go from bottom to top. So handguns are obviously the straightest line. That's because the force in which they are shot from the gun, obviously with the gunpowder, is going to keep them very flat. There is a slight arc to it, and there is a drop-off, especially with these older weapons in the game. But they are the sort of straightest firing guns in the game, or weapons in the game rather. So next up we've got cannon shots. Now, they have a bit more arc to them. It's hard to sort of... This is just to show you, really, because obviously cannons fire a lot further, so at their highest point of their trajectory, that's going to be a lot higher than a handgun. But just for reference, they still do shoot quite low. At that sort of range that a handgun has, the cannon fires quite low. Next up, we've got crossbows. Obviously, they're a little bit less powerful than a handgun, so therefore they have a higher trajectory. Next up, we've got bows, which really sort of float over, as you see in all the films and stuff, like the hail of arrows. You know, they come from quite a high altitude, dropping down on the enemy. Then we have things like catapults, very similar sort of trajectory, but obviously a much larger range. There is other weapons, like there's the mortar, which I couldn't fit on the screen because the mortar fires like ridiculously high in the air, and magic. This is the basic sort of breakdown on the firing arcs. So when we go into talk to more detailed stuff about army setup and stuff like that, then keep in mind these details I've given you here, because obviously they'll play an important part. So next up we're going to talk about difficulty level, and this is the level of difficulty in your game. Now, there's no official word from the team at Warhammer or the team at Total War Creative Assembly as to how friendly fire works. You can search the internet. If you Google it now, you'll see lots of arguments and stuff like that. So what I'm doing is I'm using my own sort of personal thoughts on the subject, and also those I found on the official forums and Reddit and places like that. And there seems to be a consensus of thought that basically the higher difficulty you have, the more friendly fire you have. I've done a little bit of testing myself. I've noticed it in games, because when I started playing the game, I was playing on normal, and now I'm on the sort of very hard on my campaigns, and I do notice a difference. This is not 100% proof, but this is what the majority of people feel. It's a very hard thing to gauge actually in the game, to work out how much damage you're doing to your own troops. But basically it works like if you're playing on easy mode, like your missile infantry, like your archers and stuff like that, do very, very little friendly fire damage. The artillery, on the other hand, do more damage, because the area effect weapons do more damage, because it's not just the damage they do, but it's also the scattering of the troops. They're out of the fight, the morale damage and stuff like that. So I would say, you know, if you're playing on easy, you can fire to your heart's content pretty much. It might do a little bit of damage, but it's not going to do crazy. But I would always be careful with artillery, regardless of the mode that you're playing on, to fire into your own troops. And then obviously it works its way up. So normal does a little bit more damage, hard makes it sort of medium damage. On very hard and legendary, I tend to only use it if I'm desperate, if I think I can win a battle, or my position. I'm assuming, you know, this little picture here just shows if I'm firing from the front. Obviously, if I've worked you've got 2 units fighting and I've worked my way around the back and I'm shooting from behind, then go for it, because that's fantastic. But this is just assuming from the front. We'll talk about positioning an army setup shortly, and we'll go into the game, tell you what I'm sort of thinking about. So, and then obviously legendary, that it's kind of last resort stuff. I kind of have a slight roleplay aspect to when I play the game, in that regardless of the difficulty level I'm playing on, I try to avoid it because it wouldn't happen as much as just because, just fire into the troops, it's fine. I try to only do it if I've got a really good positioning, or like say last resort. The thing with artillery is I kind of just never use it anywhere close to my units. I'm going to be obviously firing full range when their army comes charging towards us, and then when they get anywhere close to my lines, especially with like cannon shots, because they can devastate your own troops, I'm going to then switch targets to something further back, maybe their artillery or missile. But like I said, we'll go into that shortly. So there you go, that's how the difficulty level changes. That's the general consensus. We have no proof. You're welcome to do your own testings and stuff like that, but the vast majority of people seem to think that it just gets more damaging as you get further up, and obviously morale damage as well. So now we're into the game, and we're going to talk about setting up your army to minimise friendly fire casualties for the various different units. So we're using this dwarf army as an example, and we're fighting a little custom battle versus a Bretonnian force. So what I want to talk to you in this sort of part of the video is how to set up your troops to be most effective against friendly fire, but also things like positioning, making sure you're using correct firing arcs, and also one of the big things is changing targets and when there's the right time to do that. So this is not an overall guide on how to set up your entire army. This is literally just for the friendly fire guide. I'm going to make a separate video entirely for the various different armies and how to set them up and create the best armies and all that sort of stuff, so check that out in the future. So let's start off with, so in this army we've got a solid backbone of 4 units of dwarf warriors who will be our frontline troops. We have 2 units of quarrelers, we have 2 units of thunderers, we have a grudge thrower and a organ gun. Okay, so we're going to put our dwarf warriors in a line there like you would. I know this land isn't flat, but just for the sake of this video, just imagine that this battlefield is perfectly flat. Obviously, if you're shooting uphill or downhill, you have an advantage with regards to firing arcs, which I'll talk to you shortly about. So we have 2 units. So if you think back to when we were talking about firing arcs, we have a bunch of thunderers who use handguns, and we have quarrelers who are bows. So we know that the bows have a much higher trajectory. So on setting up our battle lines, our archers, if we put our archers behind our warriors, nice. My OCD's kicking in, have to be perfect. We know that even if the enemy gets relatively close here, because the arrows shoot nice and high, we will still not do any damage to our own troops. But the difference is, if we were to put our gunners here instead of swapping them out and put our handgunners here, is that from range we would be perfectly fine, but as they got closer, when that most important volley just before they get into contact, is that we run the risk, depending on your difficulty level as we talked about earlier, of basically shooting this back row in the back of the head. You can do your own tests as to how close you can get before you start taking the heads off people. So my personal sort of preference would be to have our hand gunners right at the front line, ready to take a few volleys, and then I'd have my archers as a secondary force. Okay, now what I then would tend to do is let them fire away as the enemy gets closer. As the enemy gets to about here, when your handgunners are firing their last volley, I'm going to be moving my thunderers back. You can either do it manually, because they're all dwarfs are good at fighting, but you don't want to get them in combat really. So you can either have them on the skirmish mode, meaning that when the enemy gets in range, they're going to run away automatically, or you can just manually move them back through the dwarf warriors, so then the dwarf warriors get on with the fight. The other option is to, and it's kind of the way I do it initially at the beginning of a fight, is that I always have all my missile troops at the front. So because they have the max range. If the enemy also has missile troops, if we've got our dwarfs at the front, then they can shoot our dwarfs, but our archers who are behind can't shoot there. So the way I tend to sort of play is to have both infantry units at the front, missile units at the front. Obviously, I'm going to have my handgunners, because of their low trajectory, right at the front. I'm going to have the quarrelers firing just behind. I'm then going to have my warriors ready to fill in. So the next point, let's assume this was a defensive posture in this game, that we were just defending, the enemy was going to come to us. I would have the grudge thrower right at the back. It's got a massive range, as you can see. It's got a huge range. What is 420? I think is the range on 420 range on the grudge thrower. It's got a nice high trajectory. We're in no danger of hitting our own troops. We want to keep it protected, so I'm going to put it central as possible, nice and far back, just to start peppering the enemy as they get anywhere within range, which is massive. Now, the other piece of artillery we've got in this unit is the organ gun, which is basically like lots of mini cannons strapped to each other. It has a much shorter range, 275, still good, but also a lower trajectory. Now, if I was to place... Remember, we're assuming that we're defending this, okay? If I was to place the organ gun there, then initially, with the max range, which we'll get highlighted there's the max range, the yellow line. As the enemy units get into that max range, we're going to be shooting away all the time. But when they get to about here, right, these are going to really struggle to... You've got to be very careful that you don't start causing sort of friendly fire. So what I like to do, remember we're assuming this is a flat battlefield, we wouldn't put them here regardless because it's obviously downhill, is that I like to have these guys just off to the side. So regardless of if they're here or not, we can still get a nice clean shot without any risk whatsoever of doing any damage. Obviously the danger to that is that a flanking unit could come and try and charge it. I normally have a bodyguard unit or two, especially because normally the flanking units are like cavalry, so because they move around, flank you. So I might have a unit of spearmen or two just in reserve, just to sort of bodyguard the cannons. You can place it here behind your troops, but you might have to stop shooting a little bit sooner or change targets. So the next point we're going to talk about, we're going to get this battle started, so we're going to just move him up a little bit. Remember that high trajectory means we can... I just don't want him to be so close that he gets in the way of other people, once our lines start retreating. We'll move this up as well, because we know that the enemy is going to pretty much defend this sort of pass. So hopefully, with the range of the grudge thrower, we can start moving them out. So let's have a look. So we know they're here. We're just going to pause. We're going to check our range. So our range of the grudge thrower is almost max length. So it's on fire at will. So it's going to pick a target in a very short space of time, which is going to force the enemy to move in. For the purposes of this video, we're going to put our archers and thunderers on skirmish mode, so they're going to run away. We're going to get a hero out of the way of the organ guns, because that would be pretty silly, wouldn't it? So we should see our grudge thrower about to let rip. There we go. So as you can see, really, really high trajectory. Obviously they're at distance, so it's always going to be pretty high. First one, that is a beautiful shot with that first fire. So I've purposely given the enemy artillery as well. We're going to ignore the fire and the damage for a second. You might want to change that. I'll go through that in a separate video of how to avoid artillery damage, but this is what I wanted to show you. So we're softening them up nicely. The organ gunners are almost in range. I didn't actually have any units to bodyguard him, so they'll just have to suffer. They're probably going to go for the organ gun here as well. So now the organ guns are going to start letting rip. Okay, here we go. Nice bit of splatty damage. Lovely. So we're peppering him as they come in, as you'd expect with all... God, they took a hit and a half, didn't they? Jesus Christ, that trebuchet is absolutely dangerous. So we're doing a nice job peppering them. Now the Thunderers, who are also slightly shorter range than the Archers, having them next to each other like this with the Archers just behind means they're going to open up at the same sort of time. So, another big hit. So now archers and thunderers have started letting rip, as you can see by the trajectory, with the archers firing nice and high over the top of our thunderers. I always forget the names of dwarf units for some reason. So they're doing fine. We're not trying to win this battle, by the way. I'm just using this as an example. As you can see, I'll pause this a sec. So at this point, our organ gun is going to if it was here, would start struggling to say hit this first unit because of friendly fire. It's not going to get that. It's a cannon, remember, so it's relatively low trajectory. It's going to have a hard time skimming the top of this and could be absolutely lethal. Another 1 or 2 shots and hitting the back of these dwarf warrior units. So what we're going to do here, automatically our infantry is now going to retreat. They're getting too close, they're going to retreat. We're going to leave the organ gun out to dry here just for this example. We just want to see the different movements and stuff like this. So what we want to do, so the next thing to talk about actually is with the artillery. So let's move on a little bit, just so they get within. I'm not going to do any charging or anything. I just want to show you some stuff. So look at the damage we've done. For instance, look at the amount of horrific damage we've caused. Well, I don't actually want the enemy to break. So let's assume our troops are about to back up anyway. But let's just back them up. I could just hit my number buttons and put them all in group 3. Okay? My computer, my buttons. I'll forget it. Stupid thing. Right. Our troops are running away. Oh no, yeah, they're going anyway. So we're going to pause here. So now, we don't want... forget the fact they're getting charged. We don't want our grudge throwers who have been hitting this front line of this enemy for the entire time to keep shooting. Because not only are we in danger of... We're probably okay. We're not going to skim our troops because it's still a relatively high trajectory. But we're in danger. We don't want to fire into combat with these guys, okay? So the next step you go is, okay, what can we do with the grudge thrower? So is to switch targets. So now, with the grudge thrower, just so I can avoid any damage to my own troops, I'm going to pick on another unit that's much easier to hit, that causes no damage to us. So the obvious units are enemy missile infantry who have sat back and are just shooting, and also artillery. Their artillery has a ridiculous range, that trebuchet. So we're going to switch targets with our... my mouse is freaking out. Okay, my mouse is freaking out. So we're going to switch targets to that. So you can highlight the unit to see the exact trajectory. So everything's perfectly fine. If we were to aim here, it starts getting a bit fishy, plus when they're in combat. So we're going to now aim for the archers. They can do their own thing, wipe out those archer units. Exactly the same with the organ gun. Ignore the fact they're being charged by some spearmen. We would do exactly the same thing with these guys, is that it's not worth the risk. We're about to get into combat. It's not worth the risk of firing into these units anymore. Maybe one more volley. So we're not going to do that. We're going to polish off these missile units. So with the archers... there we go. It's freaking out for a minute. With our missile infantry, they're now backing off. So what we could do is get them behind the warriors, and then once they've settled, they finish moving, we could turn them around and start shooting at their missile infantry. So that's one way, because we know that they're far enough away that we're not going to do any damage to our own troops and stuff like that. So in fact, what I'll do is I will split these up again, and my quarrelers, who have that high trajectory, they're good against less armoured troops, so missile infantry, perfect. But what we're going to do with our thunderers is charge them back. We'll unpause this now. Where's my hero? I'll send my hero just to help out. Right, thunderers, go away. Right, so we'll send our warriors in here. Obviously, I'm making a massive hash of this. A massive hash of this. Right, you guys go over there. You guys go over there. So what I would do, what you can do, like I said, is pick on the infantry. But if you want to avoid friendly fire, is that you take your units. Actually, shall I take these out of the? No. What you can do is get around the side here of the battle that's ongoing. Get them into firing range. Imagine that they're not losing combat and running away. Get side on, or just behind them, or far behind them, and then start shooting into the back of combat. Because not only will that do a massive amount of damage, it will minimise friendly fire, it will also ignore things like shields. If the enemy has shields, they only work from the front angle, so you can win by that road. You know, this is a cheeky little way. We're going to get right round the back of them just to finish them off. As you can see, they're holding their own in combat. So we are using our troops there. I can't talk and play, I've just realised this. Obviously, the slight risk of this is obviously getting charged by when you're not paying attention and stuff like this. But the whole point is you get around the side or around the back and you start firing into the back of this combat, because that minimises any friendly fire risk. You can do this even on very difficult level. Is minimise any friendly fire risk and do a ton of damage. If they're getting shot from behind while they're being hit in the face with an axe and a sword, then their morale is just going to disappear very, very quick. And like I said, the biggest thing, at most difficulty levels, you can still just shoot into combat. I advise against it right in the back. You know, if you're behind your own troops, I advise against it, because you can do serious damage to your own guys. But with artillery, once they've softened the enemy up and that enemy is about to get into close combat range, you then switch targets, so they're still useful, because otherwise they're just going to be sitting there. Switch targets, you know, these units that are breaking, you can just keep switching. You know, this unit that already broke is now reformed, they're coming back. So now we retarget our artillery pieces, so we can do damage to them without any risk whatsoever of hitting our own troops. And our organ guns are on the charge. they've gone from what? I really can't talk and play. That's funny. But like I said, I'm not trying to win the battle, I'm just explaining various different aspects. Good thing about dwarfs, obviously, is that they're, regardless of if they're missile or not, they're still decent fighters. So now, obviously, this unit is being taken by my guys. I'm going to switch units again to go after something like this. We've got our missile infantry going after those nice units in the open. It's really good for... Where are these? Is that my general? He's just on a walk, isn't he? Go, go, go. Boost. Chase them, chase them. So there you go, guys. Like I said, this is not so much a guide for setting up your army and stuff. This is literally purely for the benefits of friendly fire. So my personal preference is that you have those handgunners as your front line. You then have the archers just behind them, because of their higher projectiles. They're not going to hit their trajectory even, Jesus words. They're not going to hit the handgunners in the back of the head. Then you have your warriors. You fire, 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 and then withdraw. Let your warriors do the damage. Your artillery pieces, those big catapults and trebuchets and grudge throwers, they can sit right behind your main army, just peppering away. Whereas sort of shorter range guns, like the organ gun or the flame cannon, which is very short range, need to be either... Or the best way I would do it is just have them off to one side with a bodyguard unit or two, or close enough to the main line that they can be defended, so they can still fire even when that enemy gets close. If you have massive artillery, like you have 4 flame cannons, you can put them right in your front line, because your goal then is to break the enemy before they even get to you. But I don't use a massive amount of artillery. And like I said, one of the benefits, if you can sneak around with your archers and stuff, is that, like I said, you can negate shields. They count, they don't, you know, normally you get that 15% protection against missiles. You won't if somebody's shooting you in the arse, right? Basically. And I think sort of that about sort of sums up my little guide to friendly fire. I hope that's helped some of you guys out. I know that you were sort of talking about that, and like I said, Creative Assembly haven't actually come out and give us official rulings on friendly fire, but this is, with the research that I've done and my own playtime, this is the sort of details of friendly fire and how to overcome it. So it's understanding the firing arcs is the first thing, and then just having them in the rows, so you have the high flyers, high trajectory stuff, behind the handguns, which is obviously the most sort of straightest firing weapon in the game. Thank you very much for enjoying it, guys. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. The next sort of guide I'm doing will be a relatively big one, and it's going to be for individual armies, and it's going to be basically army setups. So in your full stack of army, what's the best mix of troops to have, and also how to deploy them in the battlefield. One last tip I want to give you is if you're on different terrain, so if you're on an uphill battle, which actually this kind of was in a way, but if you're more of an uphill battle, what you're going to find is that it changes the trajectory of things. So you can have either if you're facing downhill, you can have handgunners behind your archers, because they can still see over their heads. Think of like cinema seating. You can still see over their heads, everything's fine, and that goes with all the different weapons. Also, uphill actually sort of helps a little, makes it a little bit more difficult, because obviously, you know, the reverse of the cinema seating. So I'm hoping I'm not just confusing you all and waffling. But I'll shut up now and let you go and enjoy the game. Let me know your thoughts. Give me your top tips in the comment section below. That would be fantastic as well. And I will see you in the next one, guys. See you later. Bye-bye.